And tonight we're going to be talking about the filibuster, obviously very relevant to our current political environment. If you have any questions and you wish to not be recorded, as this session is being recorded, you can feel free to chat and type in your question and I can read it anonymously to the group. But of course, anytime, feel free to unmute yourself and ask or comment away, but we are being recorded. And if you want at the end, we can unrecord and have a chat after such time. So, all right, Pat, it's yours.
Hey, hey folks, glad to have you here or there, or you know what I mean. The last time when we had a small but mighty group, we had a discussion about where this whole thing should go, and in spite of the fact that when we were finishing up last time, almost all of the last sort of series of sessions we did, folks kept coming back to this concern with the new media, but it wasn't really lending itself all that well to the same kind of treatment that we did with the policy stuff. So we decided to do something different, and that's to, instead of having a series of stuff, to do individual topics. And if it turns out one of them garners more interest than we can handle in one session, then we'll just carry it over to the next one. And then also to occasionally just have sessions where we just kind of hang out, just because we don't get a chance to see each other that frequently, and not at all in person, that we do that. So when I send out the emails now, I'm going to start saying this is the agenda for this week, so you know what's coming. So if you find the topic interesting, you show up. If you find the topic stupid, then you can avoid it. If it's just hanging out and you have better things to do, then you cannot bother. So that's where we are. And the topic we came up with last time was the filibuster, and it's obviously hinging or stemming from the 50-50 division in the Senate, which falls short of that 60 vote minimum for getting cloture on a filibuster, and what's at stake is a number of bills that are pretty monumental. Certainly, what was it? HR 1 was the voting rights piece of legislation. That's one of them that's kind of been held hostage to the filibuster. The big 3.5 trillion, now 1.7 trillion spending bill. These are these are pretty significant pieces of legislation, and they're getting held hostage by the filibuster. So here's my plan of approach. I want to give you a little bit about the history, and then provide some analysis of how the filibuster has worked. And then I stole, because that's what academics do, I stole some proposals that came out of the Brookings Institution. And tellingly, one of the folks working on some of these proposals is Norman Ornstein, who is, I think, American Enterprise Scholar in Residence. It's a right-wing think tank. He's a Republican. He's one of the most prominent congressional scholars. And if you watched PBS, lots of times he's the person that they interview when they've got a story on Congress. So it's not these aren't necessarily partisan kinds of proposals. This is sort of a bipartisan group that came up with these proposals. I'm going to get to at the end. And I thought it'd be fun to, at that point, then open it up for you to say what you think of the proposals, the likelihood you could actually get them done in the current Senate, how effective you think they would be. So don't fall asleep, stick around until that point, and then I really want you jumping into to see. I'm curious to see what you all think. So for starters, the filibuster isn't an original rule or something that's allowed in the Senate. It started in 1806, and it was on a ruling from Vice President Aaron Burr. And it was to put an end to the original practice of allowing just a simple majority to call the question and then have a vote on the matter at hand. This was a housekeeping measure. This is something that never got used. So Burr suggested they get rid of it. Okay, so that simple majority then went by the wayside. It's it's important now to put all this in context. Okay, that Senate didn't look anything like the current Senate. It did, however, look a great deal like the way that the framers intended it to look. Okay, and forgive me, I'm going to give you the political philosophical background of this. This is coming out originally out of Aristotle, immediately through the Roman Republic. The framers really had in mind a mixed constitution. And Aristotle is the first one to kind of sing the praises of that mixed constitution. And at the heart of this is that any pure form of government would become corrupt. So monarchy, aristocracy, democracy. Aristotle was arguing you need to have elements of all three. The Roman Republic was based on having those three elements. If you had that sort of mixed constitution, a sort of balance, then the strengths and weaknesses of each one of those individual forms would sort of compensate for one another. Okay, so that would keep a monarchy from descending into tyranny, which is how a monarchy would decay. That mixed constitution would keep an aristocracy from turning into an oligarchy, which is how that would decay. And you would keep a pure democratic constitution from decaying into mob rule, demagoguery, that kind of thing, okay? So the Senate is providing an aristocratic element. And if you look, particularly if you look at the Federalist Papers, the way that they talk about the Senate is really in those aristocratic terms. And if you look at that old Senate, it had those characteristics that the framers wanted. It was an assumption that the folks that you had in the Senate would just be smarter than normal, average, everyday citizens, okay? That they'd be wealthier, okay? Comfortably wealthy, giving them the leisure to think about big questions and presumably be less driven by self-interest. They're already comfortable. What do they need? Okay. And finally, that they would see themselves as above public opinion, that they would see the public as folks who don't really understand what's going on. And so they wouldn't get swayed by public opinion. They would do what was best for the nation. That's an important point, okay? They would do what's best for the nation. None of the parochial concerns that you would see represented in the House, okay? And that's kind of what the Senate looked like. Mind you, it means it was wealthy white guys, right? But it meant that the Senate operated in the way that the framers intended. It did sort of cool the passions of ordinary citizens. Things slowed down when they got there, as senators would, as these exalted sages, they would engage in discussion and debate. Members of the Senate would take pride in being members of the Senate. After all, it's a pretty exclusive club. And therefore, they would actively resist any president who attempted to gain more power. They were going to confront the presidency, okay? In short, it would just look like it would look like a house full of philosophers. And you'd have that kind of, discussion. It also means it was really sort of, it was really very genteel. Okay, I mean, I know there's the story about the jerk from South Carolina, taking, was a walking stick or something and smacking an abolitionist senator over the head, the guy never recovered, but it wasn't in the, it wasn't an order. The guy was from the House of Representatives, sort of the exception that proves the rule. All those qualities got nurtured by having longer length of term, okay? At that point in time, one of you was already noted this, at that point in time, indirect election, so you did not owe your office to ordinary citizens voting for you. It was state legislatures who chose representation in the Senate. And it really meant that you had a body composed of folks who took great pride in the fact that they were there. They took great pride in the institution, and they saw the institution operating in that way. So if you get rid of that simple majority call the question thing, that's going to work differently in that context as opposed to a different context. And that's kind of where I want to go here. I want to get to the additional rationale on the Senate, because if you think about it, it's the mixed constitution, right? So a Democratic element, well, that would be the House. The monarchical element, well, that's the president. You could have said that the courts were going to be the aristocratic element, right? You could have, thought about, but this was the compromise, right? And this is in part where the institution of slavery drives this whole thing, is that the Senate made it easier for the southern states, where folks are going to be outnumbered, they could hang on to the institution of slavery. It was easier for those more rural states that didn't have as much population to gain control of the Senate, something that should be familiar right now as well. In addition, this is also a distrust of central authority, national authority. So it's putting another source of resistance to a powerful national government, which would be tied to the president. So you have that national element for the president, you have the local elements from the House, and then you're representing states in the Senate. So it gave you two bases of representation to use in countering a strong central government. Cool? Okay. But things change, and they were kind of in the process of change even at that point. A crucial development concerns the development of political parties, which the framers didn't think was going to be necessary. If you think about the way that I described the Senate, and you take a look at even how they describe folks in the House, they really thought that these were going to be the better people of society, and that they would be motivated by the public good, and they would want to do what was best for the nation. I know there are all those Madisonian things about avoiding tyranny, but if you read the Federalist Papers, all of them were always sneaking in this assumption about the nature of folks who would be serving in the House and the Senate. Not so much the presidency, but the House and the Senate, they made certain assumptions, additional assumptions about what their nature would be like. And then obviously the institution of slavery, because that becomes an incredibly divisive, emotional kind of issue, so that you get a different kind of conflict. I mean, if I name another conflict going on early on, it's whether you have a national bank or not. I know folks at that level would get a little exorcised about it, but not like slavery. Right? Slavery was going to make conflict far more virulent than any other issue that the nation was facing. And you can see that in the incidence of the filibuster, is that its incidence increases in that period of time leading up to the Civil War and immediately following the Civil War, and it's all about slavery and civil rights. And at that point in time, the Senate really didn't have much of any way effectively to end the filibuster. There wasn't even a cloture rule. Cloture is you take a vote, and if you get the required number of votes, you can close the filibuster and move to the question. You didn't even get to putting a cloture into effect until the early 20th century, right before then, sort of the lead up to World War I. They put a cloture rule into effect, and at that point in time, it required a 2/3 vote to end a filibuster. And in 1975, that gets back to the current 3/5 or 60 senators. I want to take a different tack on this now, and let's think about something, the positive things that a filibuster could do for the Senate. Okay. One of the most ardent advocates of the Senate and the filibuster was John C. Calhoun. And he argued that the filibuster played an indispensable role in guarding against majority tyranny. All you needed was, to get 1/3 or 2/5 of the senators to say, no, we're going to allow the filibuster to go on, and the filibuster just keeps going on, and you bring business to a halt. I am going to point out to y'all that there were already in place tons of mechanisms to guard against majority tyranny. It's not as though the framers didn't think that was an issue. That's what 10 and 51 and a whole bunch of Federalist Papers are about, is guarding against majority tyranny. It was supposed to be a conservative, slow-moving government. You weren't supposed to like just go back and forth with the winds of change in public opinion. They were genuinely concerned, terrified at the prospect of tyranny, and they expected it to come from the executive branch. So you already have in place an awful lot of mechanisms to guard against majority tyranny. So Calhoun's argument is, to my way of thinking, just a little specious. But it's certainly an argument that's out there, and it gets used. A more productive positive role is that it could slow things down and force more extended debate and discussion on an issue. Okay. We're not going to let you move right to calling the question right away. We want to talk about this for a little longer. This is a potential positive use. But that's not the way that it's been used, because that's not what the Senate looked like. It's a different context. If you have the same set of rules, but you change the players, things will work differently. And also intermediary institutions like political parties. It's not going to work the same way. It's not going to have those positive consequences. So that it would be really, really hard to argue, if you looked at the use of the filibuster over time, that, particularly in the last century, that it has been used in a way that really stimulated greater debate. Okay. It certainly thwarted majority will, particularly with respect to civil rights legislation. But I'm not quite sure that's where you want to thwart majority will. That doesn't really look like majority tyranny to me. And so we're gonna tempt fate again, and I'm going to try the share screen. So we'll see how this works. Here's one of the problems in looking at trying to get a handle on the incidence of the use of the filibuster. It's not a black and white thing. It's, somebody could get up and just start talking for a while. Is it a filibuster or not a filibuster? So most studies of the filibuster then take a look at the frequency with which the cloture rule gets invoked. And so that's what I'm going to try to show you. Whoop. Michelle has to enable it, I guess. The sharing screen thing. Okay. Does that look okay to folks? Okay.
Super depressing is what it looks like.
Yeah, it's pretty, that's pretty dramatic, don't you think? Certainly the famous instances of the filibuster have to do with civil rights legislation. But that's not really what's going on. This is you're picking up a little bit beginning with Nixon, and then it just goes through the roof with Obama. Absolutely through the roof with Obama. I'm going to make an observation that I've made a few times before, and Obama was no raving liberal. This wasn't a stampede to the left. Okay. And yet In other words, you didn't need to put the brakes on anything. There wasn't anything terribly dramatic going on. The signature piece of legislation is Mitt Romney's old bill. It was his policy. He's copying Mitt Romney, a Republican, and it's that kind of legislation that's stimulating Republicans filibustering. So this is not performing the function that the framers have intended. Okay, y'all good on that one? Okay.
Was there a change in, yes, it's the Obama administration, but was the leadership of the Senate, did that change at that time? Like, I feel not as knowledgeable about the Senate leadership, and I'm wondering if that was a change in leadership tactic rather than a change in administration. It was, or as a result of a change of administration.
Yeah. The individual in the Senate that I've identified as.
Yeah, how long has he been leader? My question, I guess. I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. McConnell's absolutely key in that process. There you go, 2010.
So that spike is directly correlated to him.
Well, he's the worst. He's absolute. McConnell is right after Trump, the worst human being around. But remember that this is really getting driven by partisan polarization. Okay, so it's really, if you look at that, that syncs up pretty nicely with partisan polarization, right? I've argued, from last year, that process of partisan polarization really kicks in with Ronald Reagan. Well, that was where things started going off the rails. As the parties got farther apart and more unified internally, then you were going to see the operation of the filibuster. My point is, you're seeing the operation of the filibuster, but it's not doing any of the good things that the framers might have endorsed, or that anybody else arguing in favor of the filibuster might have endorsed. Okay. In fact, I'm going to argue it's really, really, really perverse. I'm going to go back to the beginning, saying that the framers intended our government to be conservative in terms of change. All of the multiple access points and multiple veto points in the entire, it makes it really, really hard to get anything done. Okay. Again, they would see that a little differently than we do now, because they believe that even if there were disagreements, the kinds of people they thought would hold office, particularly in the Senate, would work toward a resolution of those issues. But you couldn't make big changes because that would scare the daylights out of folks. And they would know, if I'm going to make a big change, I'm going to have to assemble a brand new legislative coalition to get this puppy through. If I'm making a small change, an incremental change, I can go back to the legislative coalition I assembled for that existing policy and start with that. Maybe I lose a few votes. All I have to do is gain a few, and I can get that through. So it's a bias in favor of incrementalism. Okay. But this is bringing it right to a halt. And that's where I want to make this point. I want you to put yourselves in the shoes of folks who have gotten filibustered time after time after time after time after time after time after time. Okay. And think about, what's your plan? let's say there's no way that you can change the filibuster. Like, what's your plan? You only have one recourse, right? I've got to win tons of elections. And I'm not going to bother negotiating with the other party anymore because they're just going to filibuster me. So I'm going to turn to elections. Put yourself in the position of the folks who are doing the filibustering. Oh, you're not getting what you want anyway, but you're going to point toward elections as well. So both parties give up on governing and they turn it over to look at elections instead. And that's why, if any of you have made donations to any political candidate or party or organization, the emails are all about, Senator Warnock is in trouble, send money, or this is our chance to elect a crazy famous Georgia football player to the Senate and stop those socialist Democrats. Give your money to Herschel Walker so he can take that seat and we can take back the Senate. Okay, so that's the first thing, is they've given up on governing. They're just going to do elections. So here's the next step. Think about what happens then if one party manages to control the presidency, a large enough number of folks in the Senate, and the House. Don't you think the floodgates just open? Would you go, okay, let's take it slow. Let's think about some of the smaller things we could do with government that those sons of bitches in the other party have kept us from doing for all these years. No, floodgates open and you're going whole hog. Really, really whole hog. Okay. If you think about those legislative avalanches, things like LBJ and the Great Society, that's in the wake of putting up with Southern Democrats in Congress, and then getting a huge majority so they could control. They didn't have to worry about Southern Democrats. They had a majority without the Southern Democrats, and they could get stuff done. And so they went like crazy for really, really big bills. But that pales in comparison to the feelings that are getting developed among Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and the House at this point. Pales in comparison. You didn't have the partisan polarization. That made a difference. You still had folks talking to each other across party lines, negotiating and compromising. There were compromises made on Great Society programs. There's, if you sort of do my hypothetical scenario, the last thing they're going to bother with is making any compromises. So now take a look at policymaking in America once you've got this into place. You're either getting absolutely positively nothing of any significance done, followed by periods where there's dramatic change in public policy. We have just produced exactly the opposite of what the framers intended. Exactly the opposite. They didn't want no change. They wanted slow change. Instead, we're going to end up with no change or an avalanche of change. So that the filibuster is leading to exactly the opposite of what the framers intended. And oh, come on, let's get out of the framers thing. Anybody who knows anything at all about public policy and thinks about it at all, that is the opposite of what you should want. You need government to respond to problems that exist okay? And you, with Charles Lindblom, you recognize that our knowledge is limited and we cannot predict the consequences of really, really big changes. And if you make really, really big changes, well, maybe you get really, really wonderful things. Maybe you get really, really horrible things. It's a much riskier endeavor, and that's not the kind of thing that the framers had in mind. And it's not a smart thing to want. You shouldn't want those dramatic changes. The problem is if you stop change, that's kind of what's going to happen. People get, if Lauren's not with us, but I don't think, right? But if you talk to anybody who's worked in the House or the Senate, working for a member of the minority, it's a frustrating gig. It's hard. It's disappointing. You can't get things done, no matter how you think about your job. If you think about it in terms of, I want to provide benefits back to the folks in my district, and you can't do it. Or I want to support policies that I think are good, or shape policies so that they're better, and you can't do it. Even without the filibuster, you're going to have folks who are in the minority who get resentful. Okay. And then when they get in majority status, by God, they want to start moving. Okay. The filibuster amps that up. Okay. So I'm sorry, I've got my mathematical hat on now. So we have two variables. Okay. You can change the context or you can change the filibuster. The context, I think we've already covered that ground as being really, really hard to do, and a long-term sort of project. Whereas, and I'm going to go back to Anne. See, I always cite my sources, Anne. It's whether you are going to address the political problem that exists in the form of partisan polarization, or you're going to actually get something done about climate change, about civil rights, about inequality, problems that have reached dramatic proportions. It's just hard to see. I think all of us are sort of in the place where we go, well, if we wait to solve the political problem, climate change is going to kill us all before we have a chance to fix that. So let's take a look at changing the filibuster. And I'm going to give you the least exciting, most annoying part of studying Congress, and that its rules and procedures are frickin' arcane. They're bizarro. They honestly, lots of them just don't make any sense at all unless you think about them as historical artifacts. But here are the forgive me, I'm going to go through the details just so you can, report them to your grandchildren or something. I don't know. The problem is always that if you're trying to get rid of the filibuster, then the folks who are trying to protect the filibuster will filibuster the filibuster. So the way that you probably are likely to do this is to start out, and this is the same thing that Harry Reid and the Democrats did in 2013. And then good old Mitch, who is the master of the reductio ad absurdum, does it in 2017. The Democrats do it because Republicans are just holding up lots of Obama's nominations, particularly in the lower courts. And then Mitch McConnell, God love him, extends it to the Supremes. And that's how we get Trump able to pack the court in that way. So here's the process that you go through. It's called adopting a new precedent. So these precedents are kind of at the side of Senate rules, and it has to do with how you understand and interpret the Senate rules. So the filibuster cloture thing is, I think, Rule 22, something like that. So you have to have someone raise a point of order or claim that a Senate rule has been violated. If the presiding officer in the Senate disagrees with that, then you can take a simple majority vote to overrule the chair, to overrule the presiding officer. Okay, and then you can put in place a new precedent. Okay, so Harry Reid did that in 2013, and you needed just a simple majority then to confirm folks to the appellate courts, for instance. And then Mitch did it in 2017, so that you only needed a simple majority to get that shining legal mind of Brett Kavanaugh on the bench. So that's how it's done. But what you could then put in place is a different version of the filibuster. So I'm going to share the screen again. Let me see if I can get this here. Because it's easier rather than listening to me babble, you can just have them in front of you. Is that cool? Everybody got it? Okay. So, and because I stole this from Brookings, that's where it comes from. The first one is you could restore the filibuster to its historical popular meaning, and that's you got to hold the floor. I mean, right now you don't even have to, folks, they declare surrender. All you have to do is to say, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to let you call a question. And they go, oh, okay, but then it stop things down, and then they try to get votes on cloture. But you could force them to physically be there and hold the floor. Okay. I want to go through all these, and then I want to open up to you guys to like 2 questions. Do you think this could get passed by a simple majority in the Senate? Remembering the embarrassment that's Joe Manchin. Actually, it's Sinema who's kind of the embarrassment. Sinema's really, really an embarrassment. Manchin just.
But Manchin loves the filibuster.
Willie, he has a number of motivations that are kind of getting him in that direction. So the first thing is, do you think you'd get a majority to support this? And then the second is, do you think if you got it, would it remedy the situation? The policy-making situation. Cool? All right. So the second one is, this flips the burden. You have to keep assembling 41 votes or more to keep rejecting that cloture motion. Okay, so it means everybody's got to be, they've all got to be around. They've all got to be present and casting their votes. They can't, jet off to Bimini. They've got to stick around and keep casting those votes. And while you're doing that, the business of the Senate can continue. So other bills can move through. Filibuster right now is really log jamming all sorts of stuff. The third one is require a number equal to the number in the majority party to pass cloture. So if you lose one vote in your party, okay, cinema isn't going to support. Well, then they've got to get somebody on the Republican side to vote for cloture. Okay.
To get to that 41.
Well, to get
No,
to
that's
the
41
to the 60.
Got it.
To get
Yeah,
to
yeah.
60, because this is voting to have cloture.
Right.
Not to reject it, but to have it. Okay. The fourth thing is you could reduce the percentage of votes needed from 60% to 55% or whatever, or make it 60% of those present and voting. And there's some basis for that in history. Okay. The next one would at least deal with some of the most dilatory uses of the filibuster, because now it's not just used on substantive, but it's also used on procedural votes. So you're really gumming up the works. So you could, in that rule, restrict the use of the filibuster to substantive votes, not procedural votes. Okay. And the final one, which is actually that Brookings, their very own proposal. They've drawn those from the other ones from proposals that are already made. But the last one is to add a democracy exception. We already have an exception with reconciliation. So if a bill can be ruled a reconciliation bill by the parliamentarian, namely it's just dealing with revenue, then you don't need 60 votes. You can get a simple majority and get it through. The four folks who were putting this report together suggested their idea to add a democracy exception. And that's the voting rights. That's HR 1. That's the what they have right in their crosshairs, is that if it's anything that has to do with folks' ability to participate in elections, then you only need a simple majority. Does that make sense, y'all? Okay.
Yeah, I think that, oh, sorry, you asking opinions? Yeah, sorry.
Well, I just want, do you sort of understand what's going on with that? And then I want to go up to the top and then hand it over to you guys. Like, let's look at the first.
Yeah, Pat, I have a question.
Sure.
So can you give a rundown on the current Senate Dems and to what extent they might support any of these options? Do you have that? Do you know that?
I mean, look, the key players right now are Manchin and Sinema. And there is no way that McConnell is going to let any Republican senator get away with not supporting the filibuster. And Sinema is just such a loss.
And can I just ask a bigger question? What is going on with Schumer? I mean, you don't ever hear what's going on with Schumer. What role is he playing, if any?
I think that an awful lot of this is not going to go on in polite company. It's going to be in closed door meetings. I think it's one of those kinds of things that I think we're not going to know until Chuck Schumer is dead. You know? And folks are writing about this. So I don't.
It's as if McConnell still runs the Senate from a PR perspective.
Well, you can do different things if all you're doing is obstruction.
Yes.
You can, you know, but I think what's going on, what I hope is going on is that he's engaged in discussions with both Manchin and Sinema. The trump card is Biden. It's not Schumer. It's Biden, who has a good relationship with Manchin. Biden's reluctant to get rid of the filibuster, or he's reluctant to do anything terribly significant in terms of changing the rules around the filibuster. So Manchin knows that there's a certain amount of common ground that he has with Biden, and Biden just has to. Let me be strategic about the whole thing, okay? What you have to do then is to, and they've already done this once. They've already had one vote to demonstrate to Manchin, Republicans aren't going to play. They're not going to cooperate. They're not going to do anything. So you have to, that's the first step. You have to convince Manchin and Sinema that the Republicans in the Senate are irremediable. There is nothing you can do with them. And then positively, you have to find a way of changing that rule that he can accept, that he's comfortable with. I think Sinema's, again, I think she's the real, I think you could work with Manchin. Sinema's just, I mean, I don't think any of you are from the same, Kim Rowland, anybody? She's a former student, and she lives in Arizona, and I saw her and her husband, a month or two ago, and they're connected there in Arizona, and they say there are all these people. What Sinema had a bunch of her staff just resign. Like folks in Arizona are really puzzled at what in the world Sinema is doing. They just can't figure out what in the world is going on. I think she's the harder nut to crack, but I think if you got Manchin on board, that would put a boatload of pressure on Sinema to come along too. And she may be kind of waiting for Manchin to make a commitment so that she doesn't have to do anything. But I think it's that two-stage thing, and they're already doing the first one. It's not hard. You just let McConnell do what McConnell does. Be obstructionist. And then it's finding like something along this list of things that Manchin could go with, and using Biden to close the deal. I think that's the way that it would have to go. But we're all engaging in guesswork on this stuff. I just thought it'd be fun to engage in a little guesswork with you guys, and think about those two questions. Do you think this is something that you might be able to get Manchin support? We're going to leave Senate. We're going to pretend that all we got to do is get Manchin support. Okay. And then do you think it would have, the second question, do you think it would solve or at least significantly reduce the problem? Okay. So what do you think about, you got to hold the floor.
I don't want to dominate, but to me, that just seems obvious. That's just like a no-brainer. Of course, if you're gonna, I mean, why not? That's how it started. You can reference how it was done in the past. If this is important to you, to put a pause on this, then you're going to be on the floor. So to me, it's a no-brainer.
Did they get rid of that fairly recently? Because don't I remember Ted Cruz reading Green Eggs and Ham or something?
That's just because Ted Cruz likes the camera. He didn't have to do that.
Yes.
He's just a horrible, despicable.
But that wasn't a filibuster thing?
Right up there with Mitch.
When did it stop though, Pat? When did they stop doing that? What year? Do you know?
I don't know that there's a specific date. I think that they just got sloppy. I don't think it was a formal decision. I think it just sort of happened.
Okay, that's even worse. It wasn't a formal decision. That's even worse.
Right. So this would be just setting a rule in place that had been common practice before. Not a rule, but a common practice before.
But Pat, if it wasn't actually ruled on, did they even need a vote to do that? Could they just do it? If there wasn't a vote.
But there's also no rule that says you have to be there.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so you would need it. And to add to it, you can always show the movie with Jimmy Stewart engaging in the filibuster.
Hold on. Yeah, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's a
There you
great
go.
classic movie. If anybody hasn't seen it, go see it. Pat, but
Who
here's
doesn't
the
love
thing,
Jimmy
like,
Stewart?
he's the best. So, but has anybody in the current Senate even like put this to the vote?
Not to a vote, no, but it's certainly something that's been discussed.
The talk is cheap.
This is the
Talk
thing.
is cheap, Pat.
Yeah, I know. This is one of those. On the other hand, that's what I got paid for nearly 40 years.
Well, I like your talk. Your talk is fine. But other people's, no.
This has been floated. Manchin has already said he's okay with that. I mean, that is the one proposal up there that Manchin has clearly signaled he's okay with. Okay.
So why haven't they done it? Why haven't they done it?
Well, you might want to. Do you think it would actually make a difference? Stop muting yourself. Jump in.
It would at least.
No, it would not make a difference. That's my opinion.
But it would slow down. It would require them to actually have some freaking effort to make an opposition. It might not be the ultimate answer, but it makes them work hard. And by the way, they don't want to work hard. They're lazy. So I would say do it and then pursue other things.
I applaud your desire to hurt them, but I don't know.
We have some consequences.
I don't know that it would. I honestly don't think it would change anything.
Okay.
I honestly don't think so. Look, you can organize tag teams. He's got 50 Republican senators.
Yeah, but they're kind of lazy.
It ain't that hard. They don't even okay, so you take the first hour. We can keep this going.
But it makes them pause and divert energy from other things to doing that.
Well, but they've already diverted energy because business is ground to a halt. Okay, so I mean, if the other things you mean are like that flight to Bimini that I had in mind, yeah, it keeps them in town.
Yeah, they can't like go home on the weekends.
Whoop, we lost you.
I mean, I agree, Anne, that it would make it annoying, but I don't think that substantively it would change anything. I don't think it's annoying enough. I mean, who just said they thought there still was a filibuster because Ted Cruz likes to read green eggs and ham? Like, I don't think that is annoying enough to substantively change anything.
And you know,
And if you look at the Texas legislature, I mean, try as they might to filibuster, and I remember Wendy Davis trying to filibuster and that
Right.
sort of thing. Yeah, that majority, if they got the votes, they got the votes. We're so divided right now. I don't think sob stories or, you know, different examples and that sort of thing is going to cause anybody to stop and consider. They're going to do what Mitch tells them to do or what Schumer tells them to do or what have you.
So to me, politics is the art of the possible. If Manchin supports this, put this in place and then move on to things down the list, but create pain points for them. That's my
I guess I'm a little confused on B because I feel like maybe I'm understanding it wrong, which is very possible. I feel like B would be like I put it in current context. You must keep assembling 41 votes to reject cloture. So my thought is, okay, you have 49 or 50, well, 49 Republicans, right? Or 50 in the state, right? 50, whatever it is, goes back and forth, whichever election, right? So you still, even in today's current environment, you have the votes. So instead of it being, no, you can't bring it to the floor, it's now going to flip and it's going to say, no, you can never bring cloture. We're always going to be talking about this issue. We're never going to make a decision. So I feel like it's just going to flip. Like for me, the 41 was a little bit like, hold up. I feel like in today's situation, it doesn't really make sense. Why don't you have like 52 or something that you must have? I guess that's supported by the minority, is rejected by the minority instead.
It's you can think about this as a measure that has some similarity with the first one. It means that you have to keep getting your minority party up to the floor to vote. You got to keep getting them up. Okay, but it's not what I mean. If you talk to ordinary citizens about changing the filibuster, making a change so you wouldn't have to deal with the filibuster, this is not doing it. It's raising the level of pain that senators who want to filibuster must experience. But it doesn't stop them as long as they're willing to keep assembling those 41 vote coalitions. Then it doesn't change anything at all. So that it hinges on your guess, your educated guess about whether the minority party would fail to assemble that 41 vote coalition. And where Michelle was going was the answer is no. It's not going to stop them. They're going to keep getting that 41 vote coalition over and over and over and over and over again. And so the only benefit of the second proposal is that you can at least keep going on other business of the Senate. But it means that that other business is probably far less important legislation, and the really important stuff just keeps getting filibustered over and over again. And again, to return to Ann's point, so then you just keep filibustering stuff on climate change, on inequality, on all the major problems that are crippling the nation. Well, you just have to let it happen. So I mean, my guess to weigh in is that neither one of the first two would really change things. And mind you, I think that's part of the reason that Manchin is okay with the first one.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to change anything. He wants to hope that you can recover the days of old and senators can work across the aisle and negotiate and compromise and blah, 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 blah. He's wrong. He's just wrong. That's not the world that he lives in.
Does he really believe that though?
Let me put it in a negative way. He thinks that if you put an end to this, you're really going to blow up the Senate. You're really going to blow up the Senate. And if I can sort of jump on where he was going, he's going to go, look what happened to Harry Reid. You use the nuclear option so you could get Obama's court appointments through. Mitch McConnell comes in and he's going to use the nuclear option too. And then it's extended to the Supreme Court, far more significant than appellate court appointments, far more important. So that, I mean, that's one way to think about it. And I don't think that's an unreasonable concern. But
it's living in a fairyland.
I was surprised.
Well, again, Anne, I think there is some merit in at least considering what could happen negatively if you
Agreed.
if you scrap the filibuster. But I'm just coming back to your point, Ann. These are really problems that if you don't do something about them, the pressure is just going to keep increasing. I'm sorry. Let me go off on a little mini
Mhm.
tangent.
Agreed.
This is why batshit crazy Bernie Sanders became popular, right? Folks were so angry about the inability to do anything progressive at all. And that we'd gone backwards. We couldn't even endorse healthcare programs that Harry Truman had proposed. We couldn't even do that. It's justifiable, but you've then created a powder keg. Like Bernie Sanders can't govern. He can't. No one likes him. He can't govern. He can't negotiate. He can't compromise. But he channels all of that frustration and anger of progressives who are just tired of making no progress. It's a consistent problem that the United States political system has failed to deal with. And that's that we don't deal with change. We just don't. Folks who hold power hang on to power. They don't let it go. They don't want to make changes. And that because they have power, they hold on to it until they're absolutely, totally outnumbered and destroyed. But at that point, the folks who have been repressed, suppressed for all that time, they're not interested in compromise. They're not interested in being reasonable. They're just mad as hell. And then that drives your policymaking. That's not a good system. It's just
Right.
not.
Right.
Once again, I'm here so you have some place where dreams can go to die. It's just
Yeah. It's
Well, in that case, a question was asked in the chat, did the Great American Experiment fail then?
I'm pretty pessimistic right now.
Mhm.
Mind you, this this isn't the same pessimism I experienced from 2017 to 2021. That was existential, but now it's like, well, it's unclear that even in this situation, we can effectively govern ourselves, if by that we mean we can deal with problems facing the nation. And again, that whole production I went into, that's kind of why we suck as a nation. We don't deal with problems when they come up. We wait until they reach catastrophic proportions before we do anything about them. We sit on slavery for decades and decades and decades. We sit on climate change for years. We sit on growing inequality that gets started in 1981. And we don't do anything about it. And it builds up that anger and resentment and makes policymaking really, really hard. Sweden's looking better and better. As a place to retire, you know. Again, dreams go here to die.
I was surprised. I've never obviously really thought about shifting it to the minority, and someone might made the point in the chat that, it's about obviously about causing them pain, but they would rather be out like fundraising doing other things than making them come to the floor and making them spend time to actively reject it. I was like, well, 41, I was doing the math and I was like, well, that's 59 compared to the 60 we have now. So that's an odd number to me, the 41, but I'm wondering what about people, what would they, if we went back to the 2/3, like before, what'd you say, 1975 or something,
Right.
that they
Right.
had the 2/3. Because I think in today's world, if we had the 2/3, they, oh, here, if you're doing it, reduce it to
Yeah, that, I mean,
60%,
that's
et cetera.
that's similar to that fourth proposal. But
Right.
you know, at this point, nothing short of simple majorities will get anything done. Now, if you know, again, if you say with Joe Manchin, I would rather have nothing done than to blow up the Senate, and you genuinely believe it's going to blow up the Senate, okay. But if you want to move things forward, if you want to be effective, the third one,
To pass,
I think can work.
right.
You know, you'd have to hold Manchin and Sinema. Well, you know, you might be able to do that. But I'm not entirely sure that you could get Manchin on board to support that.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a tough political environment to work in. I think for me, I'm surprised that no one's brought up F, the last one with the democracy exception. To me, I think that's, I mean, unless it's specifically a voting rights legislation exception, because the term democracy is so broad, and that's the entire debate of anything that's being brought forward, is that especially when you're talking about voting rights legislation or any other, it's that it harms democracy. I mean, what they could spin it in any way sideways to talk about how it harms democracy, and it would never apply to that type of exception. So I feel like any type of additional exception to the reconciliation process would have to be so narrowly defined to even remotely get passed, because there's already hoopla about using reconciliation in the first place.
Yeah.
And all of that comes in with, because you could talk about, with they were trying to pass the when the human, what's it called? You have the infrastructure and then the human infrastructure. Is that what I'm saying? Or something, that element where it's like childcare and
Right.
pre-K, all of that. Well, that can feed into democracy. A good debater can just swing it and spin it all the way to talk about it effectively.
Yeah, that would be a huge stretch. I mean, I think that no matter what you have as an exception, you need to define it carefully. And it's not something that they spun out in great detail, but I don't think it would be that hard to do it. And then you rely on the parliamentarians' ruling. I mean, something that hasn't been included here is you could just like fire the parliamentarian, replace them with somebody who's willing to rule. My friends, the Republicans, they did do that. Trent Lott got rid of the parliamentarian when they had made a couple of rulings that he didn't like. He got rid of them. And you had some Democrats who wanted to get rid of the current parliamentarian, but they were really, they were alone. I mean, the Democrats largely go, no, we're going to abide by the decision of the parliamentarian. So I don't think it would be that hard to define it in ways that a reasonable parliamentarian could make rulings. They have the experience of doing that with reconciliation. I think you could do it. I mean, look, do you realize what the hidden agenda is for the folks proposing the last one?
for sure. I mean, it was like,
Yeah, and I'll just say, so I think you might be able to make some changes in the filibuster, okay? But I don't think it's going to address some of the more fundamental problems that we're having with our democracy.
Well,
And
so you're sort of actually sneaking toward answering my question about, do you see what their hidden agenda is with that last one?
It's to make sure that the filibuster.
well, they're wanting to put in place an authoritarian. I mean, that's where we're going, right? Authoritarianism, right?
If you could get rid of all the voter suppression stuff, Democrats can probably control all institutions of government. If
But-
you just got rid of that. So the hidden agenda on the last one is, this is a way that, in a sense, you can kind of get rid of those obstacles because you can get Democratic majorities in those institutions, and you can at least start getting some kind of legislation moving forward.
Is Manchin and Sinema going to support that?
That's a separate question, right?
Correct.
I think I've
And-
read that he's open, I'm gonna look, but that he's open for removing, or I don't know, something about with the voting rights legislation that with the filibuster.
I doubt that he even knows about this last proposal. This is an internal, well, not internal, public document of Brookings Institute, but it's like Joe Manchin doesn't read this stuff. I don't know really what Joe Manchin does read, aside from, stock reports for coal companies, but so there's no.
That's hilarious. I'm sorry. That deserves a good chuckle.
I thought it was better than.
I was like, there's no one off mute. I'm going to do it. I knew I read it somewhere. Bloomberg, July 15th, 2021. Manchin says no filibuster exception for voting rights bill.
Yeah,
I knew I read it somewhere.
because
Yeah, now
That was also in July. So
because essentially he's a Democrat in what should be a Republican seat, and so he's not going to act like a Democrat. He's not really a Democrat, so there's nothing that can be done to appease him, in my view.
I'm gonna go back to Michelle there and say, I think that if you're Joe Manchin and folks say we want to get rid of the filibuster for this particular bill, that's going to raise more red flags than, well, wait a second, we made an exception for spending bills. What about bills that regulate who can vote? That might work. That's different from the stuff that was in that bill. And that bill, if you remember, I mean, Karen Hobart Flynn talked about that bill, right? There's an awful lot of stuff in that bill that, in a sense, doesn't have to. I could see a parliamentarian ruling against that bill as it stood, as being a democracy and an exception. There was stuff about campaign finance. There was stuff about public disclosure of contributions. There was a lot of stuff in that bill. Okay, so just because he said that about the Voting Rights Act doesn't necessarily, I agree with you, he probably isn't a big fan, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he would reject this last alternative. And those four academics have to find somebody in the Senate to actually put that thing forward. But that's their hidden agenda. If you just get rid of voter suppression, Republicans are going to start losing.
Yeah.
They're
going to lose, and they're going to lose a lot.
But they're not doing anything about it. It's not a priority.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to that earlier thing. Like, folks who hold power, they don't give it up. They don't, they're going to keep playing that tune until there's just a horrible disaster. And the, I mean, look, the underlying thing that's going to really sustain this is, as long as you nominate folks through primaries, you're going to find it difficult to get rid of partisan polarization. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard.
But we need to figure out something now. We don't have time to get rid of primaries. Like, the clock is ticking.
No, I know that was part of that context thing that I said, we're not going to be able to get rid of those things. So what do we do here? My point is, whatever you do here, you're going to have to kind of assume that it's going to be in that continuing context of partisan polarization. Again,
Yes.
dreams coming here to die.
Yes. Sorry.
But I think there are some of these that you might be able to get through. Just reducing it, you might be able to get that through. You might be able to get the third one.
Hey, Pat, I guess I struggle, I think, of all these proposals with D the most. I think because inherently the thought around the filibuster is around the definition of the majority. And the idea that there's a simple majority, and the more you lower that percentage, it's lowering the bar, so to speak.
Right.
Which I understand why there's a sense of movement. So I get that, right? There's this idea that because nobody, the theory is nobody's going to get 60 vote majorities, right? So you're never going to have a party do that. It's supposed to have everybody work together. The people that are there are not working together, right? And that really, at the end of the day, I mean, even all of the conversation we've had up until this point in time has been around the personalities that are preventing the institution from working the way that it was designed, or at least this particular feature was designed, right? So I guess I wonder, is this a chicken and egg problem? Are we trying to fix the rules? And is it just going to create a different type of monster that still slows the process down? Does that make sense?
Yeah, let me. There are a couple of things going on there. One, on the fourth proposal about reducing the percentage of votes, like, we've already done that once.
Yeah.
So it's not big change. This was the reason that I started out by saying I want to take a look at the operation of rules in a given context, because the same rule will work differently in different contexts. So having a filibuster, as long as you didn't have to deal with slavery, having a filibuster wasn't horrible. Okay. Because the context, the nature of the Senate, the nature of political parties, all those kinds of things were such that the filibuster would be not horrible. I don't know that it was ever productive, but it wasn't horrible. I'm sure there were some folks who would take a look at it and then find places where it was productive. But since the context has changed, if you want the institution to work, then you need to change the rules. Our starting point has been, we can't do anything about the context, that partisan polarization, the selection of candidates through primary election, all those kinds of things, they're there, and they're going to be there long after I die. So what can we do with the rules so that we don't have an almost virtually dysfunctional U.S. Senate? That's it. It's, you can't keep going through the same drill and expect anything different. It's just going to keep providing the same obstruction. So what's the best way to change the rules? And I'm going to go back to Joe Manchin. How can we change it so that we minimize the likelihood of the bad consequences that he fears and maximize the likelihood of being able to actually get policy through the Senate? And that's the search. But standing still, only a disingenuous Mitch McConnell could defend that option, because he knows it's not true. He just doesn't care. You're not going to get anywhere if you just leave things the way they are. You're going to leave all those significant problems unaddressed. And the part that it drives me crazy that nobody talks about is what I've mentioned. You're building up a degree of alienation among ordinary citizens that's not healthy. That gives you a really successful Bernie Sanders campaign, that gives you a really successful Donald Trump campaign. Those aren't things that are going to promote and protect democracy in America. If you want to avoid Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, you need to do something. And the kind of policymaking situation that gets visited on the U.S. Senate. You need to do something about the rules there. You've got to do something. I've destroyed everyone's hopes and dreams.
All I was going to say, Pat, is next week, can we have something a little more uplifting?
So
let me do the uplifting thing then, okay?
Please.
I think that that you could do one of these things and actually make some headway. I think you could. And there are minor ways that you could do it with individual bills. They're not visible, they don't get talked about. But there are things that you, and certainly the avenue of getting there, that process that I described, we already used it twice, right? You can probably assemble simple majorities to then open the door to get some kind of reform done. I think you could do that. But like I said, right, it's already been done twice. Harry Reid did it, then Mitch McConnell did it. There, in an important sense, there's a precedent for doing that. So I think you can get some. I think you can get some movement there. I just think that you're going to need a stronger departure from the current guidelines if you want to start getting policy moving through. I'm sorry, Leslie, you were jumping in, weren't you?
Oh, I was just gonna go back to the presentation by our fantastic alum who's with Common Cause. Didn't she tell us this summer, someone help me remember, didn't she think that this Voting Rights Act was a sure thing?
Yeah.
And I don't remember, somebody help me remember if it had anything to do with the filibuster or not, or whether she just thought everybody was going to get on board.
We thought everybody was going to get on board on a compromise piece of legislation. I think part of that is Karen's an optimist, and she's used to working across the aisle. She's very, very good at it. She's been successful. She's been successful doing it. It's just in that situation. I mean, I was doubtful when she said that it was definitely gonna go through. And it's not dead yet.
I was in search of hope. I was in search of hope whenever I
I mean, one of the things they've been doing is revising it, right? So it doesn't have all those pieces that it had before, and it took out some pieces that folks like Manchin would object to. So it's not as though it's necessarily dead. In fact, it's making progress. On the other side, there's the notion that you need to seize the opportunity. The longer this takes, the less likely it passes. And I think that's why you have Biden jumping in at this point to start lobbying more forcefully and directly with members of his party. Maybe has he spoken with like Republicans in the Senate? Anybody know?
I mean, even if they have, I would say that we don't know about it because the optics are so bad if a Republican meets with Joe Biden, with the way the polarization has gone and the communication that's coming out of that side. It's considered like enemy territory, right?
Well, I want you to put yourself in the position of being a Republican senator. How do you, in a stealthy way, have a meeting with the president? Like, that ain't gonna happen. And so, using exactly your logic, Michelle, that's why I'm skeptical that there's been any meeting at all. That would, like, McConnell would probably like jump your case. If you were a Republican senator and you took a meeting with the president to talk about the Voting Rights Act, Mitch McConnell would probably jump your case. He'd make it clear that you are not going over to that side.
I mean, they've met about like infrastructure. I do know that, but it was one of those where they walked in and then they walked out sort of deal. So it was like they showed
there
up.
You go. There you
But
go.
it was, we're here to talk. And then there was a brief 5-minute, oh, we're not listening, we're taking a stand, and then kind of walked out. And I think at one point there were two, and one point one side walked out and one point the other side walked out. So it's not like it's a productive meeting by any means.
No, it's all, I return to it. It's all about putting yourself in a position to win the election, to win the next
Wasn't
election.
the bipartisan bill, they had a press conference out on the driveway of the White House and all that sort of jazz?
Well, there's the smaller bill that was assembled in a sort of bipartisan fashion, and that's, it's a sign of the times that then that feeds into progressive resentment. Like, wait a second, you got us on board to support this moderate piece of legislation, but damn it, we're not going to let this thing go through until we address the real priorities that are in the big multi-trillion-dollar bill. They don't want to feel like they've gotten sandbagged. It's distrust all around.
All right, a quick Google search shows that there was a series of meetings in February of 21 talking about the COVID relief package, but it was a select few of 10 members of Congress, combination of senators and Republicans, and Biden reported that it felt like the good old days. So there was some productive, and the Republicans actually stood outside and said that they felt very good. You know, it was very
Yeah.
positive. Meeting. So there was something there.
Yeah.
And
it's,
what's happened to Romney? He used to be willing, at least initially, to stand out separate from the Republicans.
not on policy matters.
Okay.
I know that, you know, he fought the good fight in saying bad things about Trump.
Right.
He's not
But
a
then he was
moderate.
done.
He's not a moderate. He's not a moderate.
But
You know,
Romney care.
It's a, well, well, that was when he was governor of Massachusetts, right? One of the most liberal states in the nation. He couldn't do what he's doing now and survive in Massachusetts. He couldn't. You know, he adapted to that environment. It still wasn't as liberal as you'd expect in Massachusetts. You know, Romney care or Obamacare is a pretty conservative policy. It's not getting anywhere near single provider, single payer, right? It's using the market. It's preserving the god-awful insurance industry. But no. If you know, once you put him in Utah, he's going to be who he is. That's where he's comfortable. Other ideas?
We're out of ideas, Pat. We're depressed.
Yeah.
It's late.
What was what's your
you're
uplifting
welcome.
idea for next week?
Pardon?
So what's your uplifting idea for next week?
Well, as I was going to go is where do folks have any ideas for, and we can jump off that if you want. But
I don't know.
I'm going to pause the recording and make our viewers in suspense. So I'm going to turn off the recording.
I